that feel good?
Boom.
Okay.
Feels great.
Well, here we are. Chris's Corner has gone online. We're on Zoom using the technology of the season to be together. And it's appropriate because all these small groups are meeting on Zoom, unless they're using some other platform that we don't know about. But my understanding is everyone's meeting on Zoom right now. Anyways, Chris, how are you doing?
Right. I'm doing great. It's great to change it up, This feels different. It feels fresh ways. In other ways, it feels like the same old thing.
Same thing, and the structures are similar. A little banter off the top, a transition into the content. And I'll transition us by saying we're in the middle of a vision series, very important season for life for our church, just trying to put stakes in the ground of some of our core values and really who we believe God's calling us to become in this time. And we've been talking about week 1, becoming a people of prayer. I love Jared's message on empowered community. The discussion in small groups last week was so special around that. What's interesting is some of the conversation that came up in empowered community was around the conversation of evangelism and sharing our faith as part of like our own ministry in the language that Jared was using. And then this week, we're talking in the 3rd week of our vision series on evangelism and alpha. And you shared on Sunday 3 reasons or 3 big ideas about evangelism. Can you summarize those for us?
Yeah, I mean, they're all based out of a scripture from 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And I think off the bat, I just said, really, it's the love of Christ that compels us, that evangelism is an act of love, and that love is patient and love is kind, and it's not rude and it's not coercive and it's not exploitative, right? It's none of those things. But it does enter into the story of another and point them towards Jesus. That's an act of love. I talked about how God's love actually transforms us. And that's key for me because sometimes when it comes to evangelism, I can get a little cynical about what's been done in the name of sharing our faith and the weird pressures that get put on us. But when you peel back all the layers, really, the reality is God's love transforms lives. And it's transformed my own life. And so that to me is a good reason to share with others. And then I just talked about the gospel being the best news ever and how God's actually making that appeal through us to others. And that if you go all the way back to the start of the church, to the start of this Jesus movement, it's always been friends telling friends about Jesus and family telling family about Jesus. And the gospel just moves through relational networks all the way from the 1st century to where we are in Vancouver.
Wow. It is interesting because culturally, and I think it sneaks in the church, there's maybe a sense by which it's like evangelism is not a good thing. And I just want to start by saying I see and know that there have been unhealthy expressions of evangelism, coercive, pressure, guilt, fear, the wrong motivation, and sometimes unhealthy, non-Jesus-like approaches. But I'm also so thankful that there have been people who have pushed through awkwardness and even through obstacles for the sake of evangelism, because I wouldn't be here today as a follower of Jesus. And it's made such a difference in my life. If someone didn't engage, in my case, because I come from like a few generations of followers of Jesus, someone didn't engage, my great grandma or my great grandpa, if someone didn't go out of their way, and there's a story in our family of like a Salvation Army officer going into a dark pub and preaching the gospel to one of my great grandpas and how that changed the course of history in our family. I'm just so thankful that they had that track, that they got awkward, that they put my great grandpa on the spot, and what a difference that made. And like, if you go all the way back, like you said, we're here because people went out of their comfort zone and took some initiative. And Chris, we've chatted a lot, you, Jared, and I, and the team, about planting a church with a passion for those outside of the church at our center. And even before we launched, we started doing things like Alpha, and we'll talk more about Alpha in a little bit. But I want just to ask you to just reflect a little bit of why it's so important for a church plant to not wait till later to prioritize this.
Yeah, I just think that, I mean, when it comes to creating a culture, what you do at the ground level is so important. It's like the foundational thing. And if you don't get the foundation right, the structure that goes up, you need to course correct. And so for us, we moved to Vancouver with the hope of seeing many, many people encountering the love of God in Jesus. And so we just knew early on in the journey that we had to risk getting awkward ourselves, take risks ourselves, and getting to know people, reaching out to people, running alphas before we'd even started weekly services, to make sure that was a foundational piece in the life of the church, and that we continue to build on that as we grow and as we move forward together.
One of the things, I don't know if you and I have chatted about this before. Oh, the leg had us cutting each other off. I hope I didn't interrupt you.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
You're right. May I?
Yeah. Yes, you may.
One of the things for reflection, I don't know if you and I have chatted about this, Chris, but this idea that God was the first like missionary, or God the first evangelist, and we see this in like the Trinity fully like satisfying themselves, creating the world out of this like centrifugal love, just like more like inviting people in to that goodness, that in like invitational act of creation, but then also in sending of Jesus, like this kind of missionary evangelist overcoming the biggest chasm from us knowing Jesus. And so I think something happens in our heart when we think about Jesus, the evangelist, that invites us to also lay down our lives, take on a bit of awkwardness, take on a little bit of cost that other people might be able to find fullness of life. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on that?
Well, one of my favorite things that Jesus says to his disciples towards the end of his life is along those lines. He says, "As the Father sent me, so I am sending you." That God, it's not like the church like has a mission. It's more like God has a mission, and he has a people who he invites to carry it out. And so really what we're doing as we cross cultural barriers and ethnic barriers and other types of barriers to share the love of God and Jesus, really we're reflecting what God himself has done in sending his son. And I know that evangelism can feel tricky one-on-one. And so one of the things that we've really committed to as a church is this idea of Alpha, creating a space where all perspectives and opinions are welcome, where it's a safe place to share. And I know you've been involved with Alpha like a little bit. And I wonder if you could tell us about the history of that and why even that was a big part of our like strategy as a church.
Yeah, so our commitment as a church is to be running Alpha almost constantly. There'll be little gaps between Alpha courses, you could call them, they go over 10 weeks. So we'll run at least 4 a year, which means that we're always like a week or 2 or 3 away from the next one. And that allows us to build a culture. The best people to invite their friends are people who've just recently had their life change in Alpha or a positive experience. And there's something that happens when Alpha keeps running, where at any point in time, so here's our commitment to everyone listening right now. There will always be a great place to invite a friend that wants to explore Jesus, ask questions about faith. But right now, on the last Alpha, there's people of different religions, agnostic, atheists. Now, all of them came to the end being convinced of anything, but could all come to the end and say, man, I was met by a gracious community, loving people. I learned something. And some of those people are plugged into small groups still, maybe watch us now, still journeying. And they'd probably say to you, Alpha is legitimately a safe place just to explore, to ask these questions. And so we're always going to have that space. That's our commitment. And then what's else exciting is our youth group is launching Alpha on the 21st. The following week, we're launching Alpha as a church. And so what we always want to be doing as a church, every one of us, praying, asking God, asking kind of ourselves, who might there be in my life that we could invite? Now, Alpha, I think it started in London. It's kind of explored around the world. I think one of the reasons why it's worked all over the world and why I've given so much of my life to it is I think it's a strategic tool for this time. Some of the things I love about Alpha is a non-threatening environment. Alpha is dependent on like God doing what only God can do. It's kind of like, it's hospitality. So it's a place of welcome. Right now we're doing online. If it's in person, there's a meal involved, which I love. Build relationships. You hear a talk on the basis of the Christian faith. And it's kind of like, hey, we just present it. And then in the discussion, we're not trying to convince anyone. It's kind of like, we'll let God's message do its work and anyone can explore and ask questions. I think that posture and that culture, I think it's the posture for the time. And I think it's a very strategic tool to reach a city like Vancouver, to like reach friends like you and I have. And we're deeply committed to it. And we would love for everyone to feel like they know, understand, and have had an experience for themselves of bringing somebody on Alpha.
And it's also one of the reasons why we're not doing any small groups on Thursday nights and are committed to that idea, because we always want that night to be free so that people can bring people to Alpha. And we're going to throw to discussion leaders right now. And we'd love you to talk through some of these themes about sharing the good news of Jesus with others. What challenges have you experienced? What successes have you seen? What would it look like for you to take a next step in this journey of sharing the good news with others, and even talk about Alpha? And so we're going to throw to you now.
Love it. See you later.